So today is all about Ludwig Wittgenstein, and I must say I've enjoyed the last couple of weeks reading Wittgenstein and trying to understand him. But I am going to start with an apology to Wittgenstein because, well, to be honest, most philosophers, most students of philosophy have a hard time trying to work out exactly what Wittgenstein is on about some of the time. And so I'm sure some of this I'm going to oversimplify or I'm going to garble, and he would be quite displeased. But I'm sure he will forgive me. At least I'm having a go. Someone says he looks like a criminal. A criminal? No, a genius is what he is, with maybe an unfortunate stare. I don't know. So today we're going to have a look at Wittgenstein's early life, because he comes from an interesting place and an interesting time. Then we're going to jump straight into one of his most important theories, picture theory. I'll explain that as we go. We're then going to have a look at a strange thing that happens in the middle of Wittgenstein's career before we get to his other big theory, which is language games. And then I will reveal the duck rabbit, of course, and we'll have a look at what the legacy of this great thinker is. That's the plan. He looks like a possessed frog. Oh my goodness. Oh my, poor Wittgenstein. Oh no. So let's start with where he comes from. And I've entitled this bit, A Good Start? ? Now, I want to take you back to April the 20th, 1889, in Austria. A child is born. Now, this child will go on to completely change the entirety of the world with his ideas. His ideas are powerful and dangerous. I am, of course, talking about Adolf Hitler. Luckily, 6 days later, on the 26th of April, 1889, in the same country, in Vienna, is born another child called Ludwig, and his philosophy will go on to change the world also, but in a far more positive way and a far more interesting way, and with far less marching and shooting, I must say. Although he will get into marching and shooting a little bit himself. So Wittgenstein is born in a very rich family. Interesting comments in the chat there. He was born into a very rich family in Vienna. His parents were incredibly wealthy. They descended from Jewish people, although by the time Wittgenstein was born, it was not a Jewish family. His father had converted to Christianity, partly just to make his life a bit easier, I believe, in Austria. So Wittgenstein, Ludwig himself, and here's, if I zoom in on this picture here, Ludwig is the little baby in this picture. But you can see he has lots of brothers and sisters around him. He comes from quite a big family. And we can tell they must be quite a rich family, because here in 1889, they're having their photo taken, which that shows you that they must have had a bit of cash on the go. They're a well-respected family, but sadly, they're not a particularly happy family. Let's put it that way. It seems that there's quite a lot of mental illness in the family. I don't know if that's to do with the way that they are brought up, or just an unfortunate twist of the genetic code. But Wittgenstein will have problems through his life with depression on and off. He will contemplate suicide, and 3 of his brothers will kill themselves by the time he is a young man. So we're talking about a family that's troubled, even though they have a lot of money and a lot of power in Austria. Now, our next photo here, why, asked Freya? I don't know why each individual did, but they suffered from depression and sadness and anxiety and things like that, and so they ended their lives early. Now, this picture here is a school photo, as you can tell, and we think, although it is disputed because we're not entirely sure, we think that Wittgenstein is this fellow here, this face here, if I zoom in a bit. Now, this face up here in the corner, that's Mr. Hitler himself, because the 2 of them did go to school together for a while, although they wouldn't have mixed very much. There are theories out there that that Hitler met Wittgenstein, didn't like Wittgenstein, and because Wittgenstein was Jewish, he sort of decided to hate all Jews. But I think that's a bit tenuous. The reason that I don't think they would have mixed very much is because poor Mr. Hitler wasn't very bright. So he was held back a year, whereas Wittgenstein was the opposite. He was so bright that they pushed him forward a year. So even though the two boys should have been in the same school year at school, they were actually 3 years apart. You had Hitler in the earlier year and you had Wittgenstein in the higher year, and neither of them were in the year they should have been. So it's not as if they would have really socialized that much as far as we can tell. Oh, how many brothers and sisters does he have? I cannot remember. A few. Yeah, a few of each for sure. It's a big family, but I can't remember the exact number. But it is interesting that these two people should grow up in such different ways. I mean, he grew up poor and not particularly gifted in the intelligence department, whereas Wittgenstein grew up quite rich and very intelligent in the brains department. And so they briefly crossed paths at school, but their connection seems to end. Wittgenstein is certainly not a fan of Hitler. During World War II, he will be living in Britain, working in a hospital, a mental hospital, trying to help the patients there, rather than being in the German army under Hitler or anything like that. So, here we go. Yes. No, I was being a bit flippant when I said poor man for Hitler. I do feel sorry for him that he was held back a year in school, but probably doesn't excuse starting the Nazi party, does it? Now, Wittgenstein, he's never completely comfortable with the fact that he's rich. He doesn't seem to value money as much as other people might do, or at least as much as you might suspect someone from a rich family would. He doesn't really care for the extravagant lifestyle. He likes simplicity. He's obsessed with mathematics and engineering. And when he goes on from school into college and university, it's engineering and mathematics that he will study. He has links to Britain, and he goes off, as a young man, he goes off to university in Britain, in Cambridge, and there he meets some very influential philosophers who maybe we'll look at some point, Bertrand Russell being one of them. And there, at first, people think that he's a bit of a nobody. He's this weird sort of German fella, at least that's what the English would have thought, the distinction between German and Austrian wasn't really very clear back then, not in their minds. So there are descriptions of people meeting him and saying, oh, this is a very, very stern, a very dour man, quite boring, quite strange as well, very intense. I mean, we saw there in his, I'll come back up, but we saw here in his picture, his kind of staring eyes. That's not just something he's doing for the camera. He's a very intense man, is Wittgenstein. He does stare into your soul, they say. And he was, very serious, very mathematical, very sort of engineering based. But it didn't take long for the people in the philosophy department to absolutely, and they quote said they fell in love with him. They said they loved him and his brain and his ability. They thought that he was one who could take on the mantle of top philosopher of the world, and this is from within a year of meeting him. These people are saying this, so he's someone with a very bright future ahead of him. But there is another blip, because in 1914, Wittgenstein, he leaves university and he goes back to Austria, where he's just in time to join the army to fight in World War I, where he will be posted a lot of the time fighting on the Russian front. So in your studies of World War I, you probably know quite a lot about the Western Front in France, Britain and France fighting against the Germans and the Austrians and so forth. He's on the other side of that conflict. He's fighting against the Russians at first over in the east, and then towards the end of the war, he moves down into Italy, where he's fighting there against the Italians. He is captured, is Ludwig, after being awarded many medals for bravery. He's someone who takes on the difficult missions. He might be quite a dour, serious man with a huge brain, but he also has this streak of bravery. He ends up with medals all over him because he keeps going out and scouting out areas that no other person wants to do, and he's proper brave. But he is caught by the Italians. He's put into an Italian prisoner of war camp, which that was in 1918. The war ends then, of course, and he comes out fine. You know, he's not hurt. Oh, did he meet Einstein? That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, the times overlap, don't they? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know if he was, well, he certainly wasn't working in the same fields as Einstein. And he also didn't spend any time or much time studying in Austria and Germany. He was mainly in Britain where he did his studies. So maybe, maybe not. Yeah, could be something to look into, couldn't it? But definitely, yeah, definitely the right time period. So when he's in this prisoner of war camp, and even before that, when he's just waiting in the trenches, you know, fighting the Russians, he's constantly got a notebook with him, and he's writing philosophy. He's writing his big sort of master work, which is called, here we are, look, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, which is a wonderful name for a book. Very Latin, isn't it? Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. Now, he's writing this, of course, in German, but we're going to be using translations here. Unfortunately, the translations, there are differing translations, and different people take things in different ways. So I've tried to pick a translation that I think is useful, but just be aware that there are other translations of his work out there. So he's in a prisoner of war camp, he's not being treated very well, and he's writing an amazing book on philosophy. I mean, it tells you what kind of guy this is. And so let's, we'll come back to that list of points in a minute, but let's start with his main thrust, I suppose, of this, of his thought, which is picture theory. This is what he's writing in the trenches. This is what he's coming up with in the prisoner of war camp. And on a basic level, Wittgenstein is most interested in how language connects to the world. A lot of philosophers before him, the vast majority of philosophers before him, had thought, well, there's a world outside, there is the real world. And then there are the words that we use to describe it, but that's not perfect. And, you know, the connection between the two is hazy or just not there. Okay. So Wittgenstein takes this in a different way. And he says that everything that we say is based on reality, has to be. That our language, the aim of language and the way that we use language is to paint pictures which give us information about the real world. And that's the only real use that language has. And it's the only real way that language makes any sense. Okay, so he called this picture theory because he was thinking that every sentence we speak, every time we use language, we are painting a picture, metaphorically, of the world around us. So I've got some actual pictures here. These are not of Wittgenstein, but these are from the Austrian army in the war, in the First World War. So we could look at a picture like this first one, and we could describe it. We could say, okay, this officer here is putting his hand on the shoulder of this soldier. That was hard to say, I thought. We can say things like, these gentlemen are in the army. We can even, if we know about our uniforms, say these men are in the Austrian army. We can say that these men are standing in the snow. You know, we can make sentences and they make sense because we have a picture. It's linking up to reality. Yeah, we can say simple things like, this man has a sword, or this man has a gun. You know, it's true because in real life, the man has a sword and the man has a gun. Our language is matching up with reality. We can take a slightly more depressing picture, maybe, like our second one here. Let's make him a bit smaller. And we can say that these soldiers are prisoners. Now, this prison camp here may or may not have been like the one that Ludwig was in, but we can say things like, these soldiers are not very happy. You know, I think that their facial expressions kind of help us with that. None of these people are smiling. The barbed wire gives us a pretty clear indication that these men are trapped. This man has some kind of bandage on, which would suggest an injury. You know, we can say quite a lot about the real world by looking at pictures. In fact, that's what historians do. You know, they look at pictures and they look at evidence and they build a picture of what happened, what the real world was like. Marina asks, what if we are the ones that are trapped and not them? I suppose we cannot tell from this picture whether we're on one side of the barbed wire or the other, can we? But Wittgenstein would say we can make basic statements about these people from our picture, and the sentences that we use, they are just like pictures. That's why it's called picture theory. It's the theory that words are pictures. Sentences are works of art that show us a reflection, or they show us the meaning of the real world. Rock says it looks like an easy prison to escape from. True, we can assume maybe there are other layers of defense. Yes, they're probably not just stood behind two small pieces of barbed wire, I assume. All right, so let's come to our list here. Now, Wittgenstein's first book, the Tractatus, which I can never say, Logico-Philosophicus, is divided into 7 sections, and each of those sections are summarized here. This is the list of the sections, but of course it's a whole book that he wrote, so each one of these sections is expanded in quite a lot of detail with examples, but I'll try and summarize what's going on here. So point 1 is that the world is all that is the case. So the world is everything. That is all there is. There is nothing beyond the world. Now you can extend that out and say, he's not talking about the planet Earth there. He's talking about the universe. So he's saying that the real world is all that there is. Okay, there is a universe. That is what we've got. That's our starting point. Now, of course, straight away, some people would start to bring in, metaphysics, the idea of maybe a spiritual realm or things like that. But for Wittgenstein, he's keeping it, there is the world that we know it. Maybe that has a spiritual element, or maybe it doesn't. But either way, it is what we've got to work with. We only have to work with what exists, and that's it. So his next point is, what is the case, or a fact, is the existence of states of affairs. So if we're talking about facts, we're talking about something that is in the world. So the soldier has a gun. Yeah, we can see that that is something that's in the world. That is a fact. It is about existence. It is about something that's happened in the universe. We could say something like Jupiter is a gas giant. That is a fact about the world. Yeah, frogs are sometimes green. Again, it's a state about the world. Yeah. So he would then say, his third point is that a logical picture of facts is a thought. Oh dear, James. So if a logical picture, remember this is picture theory, if we're thinking or we're picturing a fact, so I don't know, Jupiter is a gas giant, then that is a thought. Yeah, we are thinking. Okay, so our thoughts are pictures, is basically what Wittgenstein is saying there. They are pictures of reality. Okay. We've then got a thought is a proposition with sense. So it is a thought that has some kind of sensible basis to it. Yeah. So we have an idea, a proposition, and it has sense to it because we are thinking it, because it is based on the real world. So a thought has sense. Okay. Now, some of you might be thinking ridiculous things. I don't know. Who knows what goes on in people's minds? And of course, modern theories as to thoughts and minds and ideas sort of have gone a bit further than this, but this is where Wittgenstein is starting. That our thoughts have to be in some essence sensible because they act in the world and the world is real. Yeah. A proposition is a truth function of elementary propositions. So there he's saying that our thoughts then have a certain element of truth to them because they are based on elementary propositions. They are based on the sense of the universe. And then in brackets here, we've got an elementary proposition is a truth function of itself. So even to think of a thing must be true. So the very concept that I am thinking must therefore be true because, well, I am thinking it and that is in the world. Okay. You can see why it's difficult to figure out what Wittgenstein is saying, especially when he starts then using strange Greek letters. So the general form of a truth function is these symbols here. Yeah, too complicated. It's okay. It's okay. It'll make more sense in a minute. He uses these symbols because we've got to remember that Wittgenstein is a mathematician. Yeah, so he's trying to make philosophy mathematical. Okay. Oh, very cool, anonymous attendee. That's excellent. So what he's trying to do is to make a mathematical formula that shows us that our language is based on our thought, which is based on reality. That's what that state of symbols mean. Now, I'm not much of a mathematician, but Wittgenstein isn't just a philosopher. He's famous for his philosophy above all, but he also comes up with some pretty amazing mathematical concepts. One of the biggest ones is a truth table. He created these tables of numbers that could be used to work out equations and to find out truth from falsity within maths. And so he's bringing his mathematical ideas and he's plugging them into philosophy here. And he's trying to prove via, symbols and a mathematical formula that what we see in our mind, our thoughts, are what we make language with, and they connect to reality. His next step, or his next two steps, this is the general form of proposition. So our general thought form of, for forming reality. And then his last point is what we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence. So if we cannot speak about something, if we cannot make a sentence about something, then it must not exist. And we must not try and speak at all. There's no point making up nonsense babble. Now, this is tricky, yeah? In some ways, this is really simple, because he's saying that if you're going to say a thing, then that thing must be based on reality, or it doesn't make any sense. I mean, I could say, but that's not going to help anyone understand anything. I may as well not say that, because it's complete nonsense. Nobody understood that. Nobody's ever going to understand that, because the sounds that were coming out of my mouth do not link to reality in any way. Yeah, it's just noises. Okay. So, and quite rightly in this case, because of my weird noises I just made, Wittgenstein would say, if you've got a thought that cannot be expressed in words, then it's obviously not a thought worth having. It's not based in reality, and just be quiet. Pass over it in silence. Now, this is really tricky, because I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, hang on, Wittgenstein, there must be ways that we can talk that aren't based on reality. I can chat all day about unicorns if I want to. But he would say something like, the concept of a unicorn is in reality, so you can talk about the concept of it. But he might also say, and it depends on our interpretation, he might say, well, actually, don't bother talking about the unicorns because, well, they don't real and they don't fit in with our idea of the world, and therefore talking about it makes no sense, and therefore we may as well just pass over it in silence. Okay. Let's see. That's a good question. How do people understand babies? This is true. Somebody, I don't know your name, anonymous person, but yes, that's a good counterpoint, isn't it? People can, I think we'll all agree, communicate without language. So maybe Wittgenstein's missing something here. Maybe he's making it too simplistic. I don't know. The problem is, of course, with all these philosophers, are we in a position to argue with them with their massive brains? I don't know. But we're lucky with Wittgenstein because he gives us plenty of arguments against himself, as we'll get to. So let's see some examples of some of picture theory here. So the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. Now that's a concept which every step of the way there, we can understand the language and we can connect that to the universe around us. We can picture a quick brown fox, a fox who is both brown and quick, jumping over a dog that is lazy. I mean, all of that makes sense in our frame of reality. Yeah, the quick brown fox, I'm picturing it. I can see that in my mind. That makes sense. Sam went to the shops and got 6 eggs. We can kind of picture that too. That works. This person called Sam has gone to the shops and they got 6 eggs. We can picture the 6 eggs. We can picture the shop. It's a statement that is true. It sums up a picture in our mind. It's a very basic picture, but we can see it. And then we've got Charlie voted for Brexit because she was concerned about the bananas. That's a bit more of a complicated sentence, I suppose, but it's still an image that we can build in our head. There's this person called Charlie. They're voting for Brexit. We have an understanding of what Brexit means from the news and things, the leaving of Europe by Britain. She was concerned about the bananas. Yep, I mean, there was a lot of muttering about bananas being too straight or not straight enough, or whatever people were complaining about. So that would make sense. We can picture in our head, that word picture again, a woman called Charlie going and voting for Brexit. We can imagine her in the poll there with a little pencil ticking the box or whatever. Okay. So these things fit in nicely. And if there was any other kind of sentence, Wittgenstein is telling us, whereof one cannot speak, therefore one must remain silent. So these things are true in reality. We can say these things, and it makes sense. These are true in reality. They are worth saying. Okay? It's worth saying something that is true. Yeah? But the problem comes when we start talking about other things that are a bit more complicated. A prime example being philosophy. Now, philosophy and most philosophers spend their time speculating about the universe. They don't say sort of sensible things, or I mean, as some of you have already noticed as we were talking through that list, some of you were like, I have no idea what he's talking about. Because it's difficult to connect what he's talking about, because he's a philosopher, to the universe around us. And of course, we've already seen a few philosophers, and they all have different ideas. They can't all be right. They can't all be talking about reality in an accurate way, because some of them directly contradict each other. Yeah. So if this is the case, then surely we cannot talk about philosophy, which is tricky when you've written a whole book about philosophy, and then you're telling people don't talk about philosophy. Yeah. Wittgenstein's pushed himself into a bit of a corner there. So he decided that what he would do is finish his book with this idea that the book he has just written, and the book that you have just read, if you had read his book, has to be like a ladder. He's written the book to explain to people that such ideas as, philosophy and talking about philosophy is kind of ridiculous, because it makes no real sense. Therefore, we should be quiet. So he says, use this book like a ladder. It's a ladder that we use to climb up to understanding. Well done, you've read the book, you now understand how language works. But just like if we were building or painting a house, maybe, you're going up there, you use the ladder, you go and paint the house. You don't leave the ladder up there forever. When you're done with the painting, when you've done the task that you've done, i.e. painting the house, or in this case, understanding that language is about the universe, then you take the ladder away. So he's essentially saying is read this book and then get rid of it. Yeah, read the book, get the message, and then stop reading philosophy. And to be fair to Mr. Wittgenstein, that's exactly what he did. Maybe tell you need it again, Marina. Maybe, yes. That's a good one, Saren. What if you are reading a script? Yes. What if you're reading some kind of novel or that isn't real? That does lead us to problems, doesn't it? But we'll come to that. Yeah. So Wittgenstein, by this point, is in his early 30s, and well, he's pretty sure he's solved philosophy. He's done it. He's completed it. He's decided that it's all about language. Language relates to reality. We can only say something that has a relation to reality. We can only really talk in thought pictures. And now it's time to kick down the ladder. So what do you do if you're an immensely rich young man from Austria who has a fortune and who has just solved philosophy? Well, you give it all up. He gave all his money away, every single penny. Yeah, he no longer was rich. He gave it to his brothers and sisters, and he made them promise. He made them sign documents to say that they would never give it back to him. They wouldn't look after it for him. They would take it and they would keep it. Yeah. So there goes all his money. He gives up on philosophy. He says, I've done that, sorted it. Yeah, read the book, And he leaves university. He doesn't go and get a posh job. He doesn't use his engineering degree. At first he goes and becomes a gardener. He doesn't tell anyone he's famous. I mean, and as his book is published, it causes quite a splash, and people start, he's one of the most famous philosophers at the time in the early 1930s, for sure. But he's like, no, I've done it. Yeah, I've finished philosophy. I'll go and be a gardener. Then after a little while of that, and this is the picture here he is in his gardening clothes. Look, yes, just being all anonymous. He then goes and becomes a school teacher. Looking after kids in school, teaching them basic maths and basic science. Again, he never lets on that he's a famous philosopher. He doesn't want anyone to know. He wants to be um, is a serial killer stare, they say. Oh, poor Wittgenstein. He was an intense man. He was an intense man. He had starry eyes, but he was lovely. What I'm about to say kind of contradicts that, actually, because as a school teacher, he is working with little kids all day, and he gets a bit of a bad reputation even back then, because he will fly into rages and he will beat up his students if they don't answer their maths questions correctly. So he's a very strict teacher. He doesn't have much patience for people, and so he was disciplined at one point for hitting the students too much, which, as we think, this is the early 20th century when hitting students was quite normal. What are you doing if you're hitting them too much? I don't know. So he was disciplined by that, but not sacked, at least. I don't know what that tells us about him or the school, but there you go. So he's very, very strict. He is quite lovely. I quite love him. But yes, maybe he has a short temper, let's say, and he doesn't suffer fools. That's the problem, even if that fool is 7 years old and getting their basic maths questions wrong. But, he's living, he doesn't let anyone know that he's this famous philosopher. And as he's kind of almost hiding out in Austria for all these years, gardening and being a school teacher, just keeping out of it, he's not writing philosophy. He's not using any of his university credentials. He's not telling anyone he's a philosopher. And his book is getting more and more famous. More and more people are reading it. They're saying, wow, this guy is a genius. This guy is like the future of philosophy. Anyone know where he is? And of course, no one does know where he is. He's gone. He's given up. He's done it. He fixed philosophy. What does he need? He's not needed anymore. By his own philosophical thought, there's no point talking about philosophy because it doesn't always connect to the universe. Therefore, we may as well pass over it in silence. Oh, people are saying he's a weirdo. He's not a weirdo. He's an eccentric weirdo, maybe. But it doesn't stay this way for long. Now, Wittgenstein is the perfect example of a philosopher, in my opinion. Good. He's a perfect example of a philosopher who changes, who develops, who matures. When he was writing about picture theory, he was a young man. And no matter how hard he tried, yes, he gave up his fortune, and yes, he became a school teacher and stayed hidden away. He just couldn't stick, his brain wouldn't stop working. He couldn't stop thinking about philosophy. And he started to read articles that people were writing about his book. And he started to get frustrated because these other philosophers or these journalists or these academics, these, intelligent people from universities, they're getting it wrong. They're not understanding what I wrote down properly. And it starts to frustrate him. And so after about 20 years of being, out and away, he goes back to England. He goes back to Cambridge and he starts talking about philosophy again. Because he wants to make sure that everyone understands him. They've got it wrong. But then as he starts working, he realizes that, hang on, maybe I got it wrong. Because Wittgenstein, depending on how you interpret him, he does a complete 360. He decides that, no, everything I wrote down was wrong. Oh, that first book was rubbish. Oh, no, I don't like it at all. And so he starts work on something else. And this work is going to take him a long time. He's going to be writing this for about 20 years, his second work. And he's never going to publish it. It's never going to be released until after he dies, in his 60s, his early 60s he dies. But he spends his time in Cambridge, working with people like Russell, other philosophers who are incredibly important in their own right. But he still wants to stay under the radar. When the war comes, the Second World War, he's in England, and he doesn't need to go and fight. I mean, he's, Austrian, so there's problems there. They're not going to welcome him into the British Army. Yes, I suppose I do mean he does a complete 180, not a 360. Otherwise, he'd end up where he was, wouldn't he? Yeah, you're right. So yeah, he wants to help with the war effort on the English side, and so he gets himself a job working in a mental institute for patients with mental illness, some of whom have been damaged by the war, others who were just already had problems. And there again, he keeps it a secret as to who he is. according to one source I read, there were a couple of people working in the hospital who knew him because, you know, of his photo on the back of a book they'd read or something. And he swore them to secrecy. He said, "You cannot tell anyone that I am the Wittgenstein. You know, I am, I am not. I'm just a doctor here." Yes. Some of them called him, as a kind of a knowing joke, they called him Professor Wittgenstein, but no one else understood what they were talking about there. But yeah, he kept it secret that he was this, you know, genius, and he just got down and did all the dirty work like everyone else in the hospital. You know, he wasn't important. He didn't show off or anything. Oh, so this man here in our picture is also, that's Bertrand Russell, who is one of his teachers, but also one of his students in a way, because they worked together quite a lot. Yeah. So Wittgenstein, he's there and he's working, and as he's working, you know, in quite basic jobs, he's also thinking and he's also writing, but he's never quite happy with what he comes up with. He's pretty sure that what he came up with originally when he was a young man is wrong, but it takes him a while to come up with what is right. You know, it's all very well and good saying I was wrong, but you've got to find the answer. You know, is he ever happy? That's a really interesting question, actually, Marina. Is he ever happy? I don't know. I mean, as I said at the start, he comes from a family with a long history of mental illness. He did say things, you know, at different points during his life. He said, you know, he seriously thought about just killing himself. So I don't think he is someone who's massively happy. He's never satisfied. You know, he's trying to, you know, he's not doing what his brothers do and killing himself, but he is trying to, you know, he's constantly trying to reinvent himself and change his life. You know, he must have thought, you know, what I need to do to be happy is give away the money and become a gardener. And then he must have thought, wow, what I need to do is to stop being a gardener and be a school teacher. And then he must have thought, oh, hang on, no, I must stop being a school teacher and go and do my philosophy. And he's constantly trying to change up his life and make it better for himself. So yeah, I think like a lot of geniuses, he's never quite happy. In fact, when he's 61 years old, or well, a bit earlier than that, he is diagnosed with serious cancer that is going to kill him. And the doctors come in just before he dies and say, Mr. Wittgenstein, I'm afraid you don't have long to live. You are going to die. And he looks at them and he says, oh, good. And that's that. You know, I mean, that's the kind of mental state that he's in a lot of the time. He's a troubled soul. But at the same time, you read philosophers and people who worked with him, and they do talk about how wonderful he was, how he was a genius, and that they loved him. You know, he was gentle and kind, except for a little blip with hitting the students there. You know, but by all accounts, he was kind to people and gentle with them. He was a bit difficult to understand because he would often just walk into a room and start chatting about stuff that no one else understood. You know, he would carry around works by Tolstoy, and he would memorize huge passages from these dense Russian books, and he would just stand and give these speeches from these books, and everyone's like, what are you chatting about? I don't understand. Oh, Rock, yeah, his brothers died when he was very young, so when he was a teenager or even younger. Yeah. So yeah, he had a difficult life, but he did come up with something. And after his death, his new thoughts were published. We're not sure if they were completed. We're not sure if he wanted them to be published. I mean, he never published them himself. But his new theory is language games. And some philosophers say this is a progression of his earlier thought, that he built on it. Other philosophers or philosophical historians say that it's a complete change of mind. He's basically doing the opposite of what he said originally. And there are strong arguments for both of those things being true. But let's explain what language games are. He says that actually language is nothing unless we understand the context behind it. Okay, so it's not always that language is used in the same way by all people at the same time. Therefore, because we can interpret language differently, we can say that people are playing games with their language. The things that we say can have very, very different meanings depending on who we're saying it to, what situation we are in, what we want the words to convey. Okay, so the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. It could be something that we're talking about as a fact. You know, there's a quick brown fox jumping over a lazy dog. We could picture it that way. Sorry, is it supposed to be jumps, not jumped? I don't know. I can't remember. But of course, this sentence is also used in other ways, isn't it? It's used to try and help people pronounce their words correctly. It's used to try and teach people about vowel sounds and things like that. So it could be that this sentence is a description. Someone might be pointing their finger and saying, oh, look, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Okay, that is a direct link to reality. Or they could just be saying it with no real meaning about dogs and foxes. But they could be saying it in a classroom. Repeat after me, students. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. We could also, with our words, we could change it ever so subtly and make it quite differently. We could put a question mark after it and say, it's a question now. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog? Maybe? I don't know. We could put an exclamation. We could say, oh no, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. You know, this is terrible. It's jumped right into the rhubarb patch or whatever. Yeah. So with very slight changes of punctuation or the way that we say the words or the way that we picture the words or the way that we are using them, and he would say the way we are playing with the words, because it's a game, that changes the meaning completely. Let's take our next one. Sam went to the shops and got 6 eggs. So we could be talking about a person called Sam who went to the shops and bought 6 eggs. Yeah, that's straightforward, I guess. But yeah, Sam could be a dog. Yeah, Maria. Yeah, we have no information here about Sam. Sam could be a boy or a girl. It's a name that applies to both, or either. So it doesn't really tell us much about this person. We have no real data on the shops. Are we talking that Sam went to the shops, went to, I don't know, the egg shop? Did they go to the supermarket? Did they go to the grocery shop at the end of the street? We don't know. Yes, we have no idea what kind of eggs they are. Ostrich eggs? Crocodile eggs? Standard chicken eggs? I don't know. And then, of course, there are other considerations completely. Maybe the eggs aren't eggs at all. Maybe this sentence, says Wittgenstein, or a sentence like this, yes, it could be they get to the toy shop and got toy eggs. Yeah, we don't. Yes, it doesn't say they are eggs to eat. This is true. Yeah. And someone there made a good link between. So I'm just looking at the comments now. Some of them, yeah, like Van Gogh. Yeah, going back to his depression, he was not satisfied. Yes, he definitely has some issues going on in the background. And his brothers and sisters, as far as I know, they carried on to become, to be rich, successful people, most of them. I haven't looked into his extended family tree. As I say, big family. Could be chocolate eggs, Seren. Yes, dinosaur eggs, Flick. They're definitely. But what Wittgenstein says, it might not be eggs at all. Let's imagine a dark, rainy night. Let's imagine in Vienna, a small alley. And in that alley is a man with a broad hat and a dark coat, and he walks up to a otherwise completely unremarkable door, and he knocks 3 times, and someone says, yes, and he says, Sam went to the shops and got 6 eggs, and all of a sudden the door unbolts and he's let in because it's a secret password. Yeah, this could have nothing to do with any kind of reality at all. It could just be a password used by a criminal gang or a group of spies. We don't know. Yeah, you could find a weird sentence like that on the bottom of a secret message. Sam went to the shops and got 6 eggs. Ooh. It could be, more specific than that. Maybe it's a group of criminals who are actually talking about sticks of dynamite. Sam went to the shops and got 6 eggs, talking about the dynamite they need for a bomb. We don't know. It can be completely different depending on the context, depending on what game we're playing with our language. Are we describing the world around us, which is what he said originally? That's what all language is about. And if we're not, then don't speak. Now he's saying, actually, we can play loads of different games. It could be a hopscotch game, kids in the classroom, in the playground shouting, Sam went to the shops and got 6 eggs as they hop around the playground. We just don't know. Depending on who's using it, the meaning changes significantly. Our last one here, Charlie voted for Brexit because she was concerned about the bananas. This is an example maybe of something which The word Brexit here, that tells us that actually language can change quite a lot. Is that because reality is changing? I mean, the word Brexit is a new word. It didn't exist until, 2016. No one had ever used that word. It wasn't a word that had any meaning or any sense until we understand what's going on. Yeah. Oh, you can spell a sentence starting with each word. This is true. Yes, yes, you can. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you can just use language to make poetry or art, can't you? Just maybe it's not so much about what the words mean, but the sound of it and the rhyme of it. Yeah. Mm. Now, it could be then that Charlie is voting for Brexit because she was concerned about the bananas, and that might say, okay, she was concerned about the European regulations on the sale of banana products. Could mean that, couldn't it? But it could mean that Charlie was scared to death because she's haunted by terrible life-sized, no, well, man-sized bananas with staring eyes that chase her around the place and whisper in her dreams, "You must vote Brexit, you must vote Brexit." That could be the way that the bananas are concerning her. Charlie could be quite insane. We just don't know, yeah? It all depends what context we are talking about and how we are using our language. What game are we playing? So this is a really big skip around from where Wittgenstein was earlier in his life. And so when people, students of philosophy, when they study Wittgenstein, we talk about early Wittgenstein, which is where he writes his 7 rules and they all lead to the picture theory. But we also talk about late Wittgenstein, the Wittgenstein who actually decides that he was wrong to begin with, and he needs to either completely change it or build upon it, depending on how we look at it. Like I say, scholars are divided on this idea. So it makes us think about the words that we use. You can probably, and in fact I know, I teach some of you in subjects and I speak to some of you in real life. Sometimes, young people especially, can have whole conversations with me that I don't understand. They can talk about, I don't know, Fortnite, yeah, and they can start talking about memes that have deep layers of meaning to them, but I don't understand at all, because I've never played the game Fortnite, and I've never seen a lot of these memes that the young people talk to me about, and therefore, to me, I'm just hearing gobbledygook. Yeah, what's Fortnite? Yes, a computer game. So if someone can come and talk to me for a long period of time about the computer game Fortnite, and they can use a lot of words, some of which I would understand, but I wouldn't understand them in context. So they could talk about the different kinds of weapons used or the different kinds of buttons used to make your character jump around the screen. It wouldn't make much sense to me because I'm not playing that language game. There is a language game attached to the actual computer game, which people might understand. People might start talking to me about, I don't know, hurricane tortilla. Yeah, I don't understand what that means unless I've seen the meme that connects with that. And then I understand what message they're trying to convey. Yeah. So I might be living in a world and playing games with my language that other people are not. So it's tricky to try and work it out. So, oh, here's a good one. Thank you, Charlie. So in the chat here, we've got Fortnite is battle royale game launched in September 2017. The objective of the game is to stay alive and safe from the approaching storm. 99 other players by doing everything that you can, from hiding in bushes to build fighting to fleeing when you're low on health. Okay, I understand a lot of those words individually, but I still don't really get the concept. Yeah. And Marina is telling me that it's a tsunami, not a storm. So I don't know, it gets more confusing. Yeah. So people can use different games. If I go to and this is the example that Wittgenstein used for his language game. If I go to a building site, I might find 2 builders and they're only using a few words. You know, the one might look to the other and go, pillar, and then the other one will know exactly what they're talking about. They'll go and pick up a pillar and put it there. He might say slab, and the other guy will just go and pick up a slab. And yeah, you know, they understand each other, but we take that out of context. We take those 2 builders and we put them in the pub or we put them in the park, and one turns to the other and says, pillar. It doesn't mean anything anymore, does it? Because there are no pillars. They're not building a building. It's just a word now. but it could mean something else. It could be the word that those two have decided means, I don't know, high five, pillar, and they clap hands. We just don't know. Different people in different groups will use different language games. A human pillar, weird. So, and this I think is more understandable for us and more relatable. His earlier idea that every language we must use must have some relation to the universe, to the world around us, is tricky because we can think of lots of examples where actually we enjoy language or we use language and we're not talking about sense. I mean, I play a game called Warhammer, and so I can talk with my friends about that for many hours on end. Outsiders wouldn't have a clue what we were talking about. The language we would use would just be incomprehensible because it has no relation to their universe. Different people live in different worlds. Yeah, we have different contexts around us, and so language has to adapt to that, says Wittgenstein. There you go. Oh no, Jane. Oh, that's cool. That's good. It's a war game with little figures. Yeah. So, and of course, if you don't know what it is, then it makes no sense. But I could talk to you for hours about it. It wouldn't help you out though, because I'm playing a different language game. Yeah. Now, what Wittgenstein used as a famous example of this is the duck rabbit. Yeah. So, if we're talking about picture theory, every picture relates to the world around us. A sentence is a way of describing or making a picture from a thought that connects to the world around us. What happens when we end up with this little creature here? And this is a picture that he used in his writing. There we are. We have some Warhammer fans and some Warhammer people who are just confused. Yeah, that's how it works. So here we've got a picture of a duck. Yeah, we can see the beak, we can see the eye, quite a cute little duck. But of course, sometimes people look at this and they don't see a duck at all. It's easier if I turn it round, but if you haven't seen it already, it could be a rabbit, couldn't it? 2 ears, the eye. Is it a duck? Is it a rabbit? It's a duck rabbit, we could say. So for Wittgenstein, this is a good example about how actually language might not always be able to tell us about the truth. One person looks at this picture and straight away they go, that's a duck. And in a way, their statement is true. But someone else looks at it and goes, hang on, that's a rabbit. Yeah, I've done this experiment with lots of classes in my time. You put up a duck rabbit on the board and about 50% say duck and about 50% say rabbit. And then the other half go, oh yeah, I can kind of see that is a duck. And the other half go, oh yeah, I can kind of see that is a rabbit. Because once you know to look for both, you can see both. But that's how language can work. I can say one sentence in one way and give one meaning. And I can say exactly the same words and give another meaning. Yeah, I can say, well, here's a good example. I shot Brian and Brian died. Now that's a straightforward sentence. I shot Brian and Brian died. But I could be in a court of law talking about a murder that I committed. I shot Brian and Brian died. But I could also be sat with my friend talking about a computer game we just played. Oh yeah, I shot Brian and Brian died. It's a very different context, isn't it? Yeah. Both the same exact words. Brian is still in a way dead, but is he dead in a computer game or is he dead in real life? There's a big difference there. That's like our duck rabbit. Yeah. Rest in peace, Brian. Why is there water? Asks Flick in the picture. Well, it could be water, couldn't it? Or it could just be a bit of shading. Maybe the rabbit is poking its head out of some grass from behind a grassy knoll or something. I don't know. Yes. But it's tricky. You can look at it both ways or either way or whatever. So Wittgenstein, he didn't get to see how his later philosophy hit home. Yeah, he kept it private, and after he died, then it was published. So in his life, he only published that one book, that solved philosophy, but it didn't make him happy. Yeah, it made him frustrated. At first, he started trying to correct people who misunderstood him. Then he started to actually work against his original theories and start to, expand and come up with new philosophies about language. But in his head the whole time, it's all linked to maths and engineering. He's thinking about it logically. So we don't know. I mean, I can pretty much be assured that if Wittgenstein was here now listening to this, he'd say, no, you have it all wrong. You are so stupid. And he'd stare at me, wouldn't he? No, you misunderstood everything. I mean, why do I even bother writing these things for you people? No, that kind of thing. He would be quite annoyed. But when it comes to his legacy, even if we haven't heard of Wittgenstein and we haven't heard of his ideas, he is credited with inventing something which is used quite widely today. Because if you're someone who's talking about the use of language, then, well, there might be alternative ways of using that, yeah? So here's from some of his posthumous writing after he died. If I were a good draftsman, I could convey an innumerable number of expressions by 4 strokes. And here we have our little pictures, yeah? Such words as pompous and stately could be expressed by faces. What a good idea. Doing this, our descriptions would be much more flexible and various than they are expressed as adjectives. So instead of just saying, you are pompous or I am pompous, you would draw a little face to represent that. And you could maybe use that for sad or happy or laughing out loud. I don't know. If I say of a piece of Schubert's, that's music, that it is melancholy, that is like giving it a face. He's describing an emotion, so he could kind of give it a face. I don't express approval or disapproval. I could instead use gestures or Rie's dancing. In fact, if we want to be exact, we do use a gesture or a facial expression. So maybe language shouldn't be just relegated to words on a page. Maybe we could draw little faces. And of course, I'm sure a lot of you do that nowadays because we call those now emojis. I don't think he called them emojis himself. That's far too ridiculous a word for good old Wittgenstein to use. But yeah, basically, he created the emoji. He was the first person to come up with this principle of language that actually it might be more useful instead of just writing words to describe concepts. Why don't we just draw a little face? Yeah, we can then sum up a whole load of meaning far more accurately than if we used written words. And yeah, that comes on. It used to be called an emoticon. That's true. Yes. Yeah. I don't know if he ever gave these things names. But you can see here, this is the first time that emojis are used and talked about as a form of language. So it's probably not his crowning glory, but it's definitely something which plays an important part in our world today. Something that is increasingly used more and more. In his life, does he draw or write more? He certainly wrote more, than drew. Yes, he's not much of an artist. To be honest, he spent a lot of his time working with numbers and maths, but I don't want to give the impression he's too cold. People did say that at first he seemed scary and he seemed very just beyond. Yeah, he was a difficult man to get to know maybe, but once you did, you understood that he was a true genius who was kind and loving and thoughtful and, troubled, definitely troubled, but important. Marina says he beat up kids. I wouldn't go so far. I mean, it was common back then to hit children if in school. That was expected of teachers. But yes, yeah, okay, maybe he wasn't perfect, eh? All right, so in a nutshell, that is Wittgenstein. As always, if you're interested in him, I urge you to go and try and read his works, probably in the English, because although they are dense and although they are tricky, he's a man that's worth understanding, I think, or trying to understand. Like I say, he probably wouldn't be very happy with the way that I explained him today, but yeah, I think it's still worth having a go with all these philosophers. Never be put off by the fact that they're a bit weird or a little bit complicated. Have a read, see what you can take from it, see if you can play a language game with his words. There you are. The originals are in German, but they have all been translated into English now. There you go. Thank you very much, everyone, and hopefully I'll see you in a couple of weeks for another one of these. Adios.